welcome to another episode on the Global Mic.
Okay, so are you ready to jump into some international relations?
Always.
Yeah. All right. We're going to be looking at the U.S. and Colombia and this deportation thing. It's actually a lot more than just a simple disagreement about deportations, though.
Yeah.
We're looking at some breaking news reports, and we're going to unpack why this matters, not just for those two countries, but potentially for the world.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting how a domestic issue, right? Like U.S. immigration can suddenly have all of these repercussions all the way down in Colombia. It's just a good reminder that in our globalized world, things are very interconnected. What happens in one country inevitably affects many others.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so let's get into it. So the U.S. wanted Colombia to take back some deportees, and they weren't exactly playing nice about it, right? Like, they were threatening some pretty heavy stuff. We're talking about tariffs and sanctions. Can you break down for us what those terms actually mean and what kind of impact they could have?
Sure. So when we talk about tariffs, we're talking about taxes on imported goods. It makes, in this case, Colombian products more expensive for American consumers. Sanctions are much broader. It could be like limiting financial transactions or travel. Both of these put a serious strain on Colombia's economy, especially because they rely so heavily on trade with the U.S.
Got it. And to add another layer of complexity here, the U.S. insisted on using military aircraft to transport these deportees.
Yeah.
I'm trying to wrap my head around this. Why is the method of transport such a big deal in this case?
Oh, it's all about the optics. It's all about messaging. Using military planes for something like this, it's very unusual. It's easily interpreted as a show of force. Imagine you're in Colombia and suddenly there's a military plane landing and it's full of deportees. Doesn't exactly feel very collaborative, does it?
Right. Not exactly a friendly welcome home.
Exactly.
Okay, so facing all this pressure, Colombia ultimately did agree to accept these deportees, including on those military aircraft. So does this mean that they just caved, or is there a more nuanced way of looking at this decision?
I mean, I think there always is. It's important to remember that Colombia is in a very difficult position here. The U.S. is such a massive trading partner. It's not like they can just ignore these demands. So agreeing to this deal, even if it's not ideal, might have been a way to minimize that economic damage and avoid further escalation. It could be seen as strategic rather than just surrendering.
Okay, so we have this agreement, but there's one weird thing that I noticed. So the Colombian foreign minister, he mentioned using the presidential plane for the deportations, and that's not a military aircraft. That seems like a subtle but potentially significant difference. What do you make of that?
Yeah, I mean, that discrepancy is interesting, right? It suggests that maybe both sides are trying to control the narrative here a little bit. Like the U.S. might be emphasizing the military aspect to project strength, while Colombia might be downplaying it to kind of maintain a sense of autonomy, you know? This is classic diplomatic maneuvering, where what you say can be as important as what you actually do.
Yeah, interesting. So we've got this agreement, but I don't know, something doesn't quite add up. This whole incident feels like it's part of a larger pattern. We've seen the U.S. taking this really hard line on immigration, and not just with Colombia, right? It seems to be something they're doing with other Latin American countries as well. Can you connect the dots for us? What are some of the historical and political factors that are driving this approach from the U.S.?
Sure. I mean, first of all, you have to understand that there's a lot of history here, right? Centuries of U.S. intervention in Latin America, economic disparities, migration patterns that have been building for decades. And then, of course, you have the internal U.S. politics, where immigration is a very hot-button issue. Politicians use it to get votes. It influences elections and obviously policies. So all of this feeds into the situation that we're seeing today.
Okay, that makes sense. So what does this all mean for the future of U.S.-Latin America relations? Is this just a temporary bump in the road, or could this have some lasting consequence?
Well, I think that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? It certainly has the potential to further strain those relations, and it raises some serious questions about using economic pressure as a tool in foreign policy. I think this whole thing highlights the need for more understanding, more cooperation on these complex issues like immigration. These things affect multiple countries. It's not just one. It's definitely something to watch closely moving forward.
Definitely. All right, so one final thought for everyone out there listening. Could this agreement with Colombia, could this be a sign of things to come? Will we see more of these take them back or else tactics from the U.S. in the future? And if so, what does that mean for the global community as a whole? Think about that.
Yeah, that's a good question.
All right, we're going to leave it there for today. Thanks for listening.